Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week, we'll be doing a season 1 wrap-up and discussing what we've learned. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
So, season 1. Did you know this show had seasons?
I mean, I did. I don't know if we've communicated that to our listeners, and so I don't know how.
This is a shock to me. I'm learning it right now.
I don't know. Are you gutted?
I'm gutted. Hashtag. Yeah, it's a surprise. Surprise finale. But just because there's a finale to season 1 doesn't mean there's not going to be a season 2. The show's already been greenlit for a season 2.
Correct.
We will be back.
So what we're going to do today is sort of talk about what we've learned. I think despite Maddie's comments to the contrary, we did always know this was going to be a season, and then we were probably going to take a break to sort of regroup and absorb some more content and be able to come back with a full season 2.
I mean, I wish that we had time to only ever be consuming content to then talk about on the podcast, but we do both have full-time jobs. So yes, unfortunately, we need a watching season in between the podcast.
And we've gotten some really great suggestions. I know we were able to fit in a couple of suggestions, listener suggestions in this season, but we definitely have gotten several more, and we want to take some time with them as well.
And we would like even more than that, because in this off season, we do plan to obviously be coming up with a bunch of new things to talk about, and we would love to crowdsource that process, because obviously we haven't seen everything. And so if there's anything that you guys think of that would be, ripe for discussion, please send it our way.
I think we'll also, when we come back, be able to revisit some of the things we covered in our first season. We know some revivals have already happened. We know some revivals are on the horizon. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens with that Teen Wolf revival, if anything.
Yeah, the movie. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, I don't know when that's going to come out. So we'll see if it's out by the time we come back.
Yes, with many other things, right?
Yeah. So in addition to coming up with more content, there are, I think, a few reasons why we're taking a break. One of them, obviously, professional reasons. I mean, need we say more?
Need we say more?
But yeah, coming up with the ideas for another season. And we also, surprise, surprise, have another project in the works that, just to tease, we will be talking about later in this episode.
Yes. So stay tuned.
Yes. But in the meantime, we didn't want to just end it on that Supernatural finale, even though, boy, we could have, because there's plenty to think about there. We wanted to take some time, and we've done this for basically a year at this point. And I feel like we've learned a lot, and we've thought about a lot of things we never considered before. So we wanted to do let's sit down and talk about what we've learned. How we've changed and grown as people.
Yeah, we've grown a lot. What a time we've had.
Yeah. So I guess in no particular order, we will just go through the things that have changed in our perspectives over the course of this time. And I think we should start with you, because when we entered this podcast, I was already somebody who had some awareness of, fandom and the stuff we've talked about in all of these episodes. And you were coming more from the perspective of an outsider, didn't necessarily get why people were into it. And so how has your experience changed that, maybe?
So, yeah, this has been great for that. I think, as we're going to also talk about when we talk about our next project, this is a topic area I've been interested in for some time, but because I guess there's something wrong with my brain, I need structure to accomplish things. So having to
need deadlines, people.
I need deadlines. So having this podcast as a structure to explore this topic that I was interested in obviously motivated me to do that. And I think I've really grown to appreciate a number of different reasons people engage in fandom. I think we talked about sometime in the last couple episodes that, we were doing more scholarly work at the beginning that was really diving into those theories of why people engage in fandom. But as you all know, if you've listened to all the episodes of the podcast, I had my own transformative experience with Starsky and Hutch, which we can talk about a little bit as well. But yeah, you know, a number of the reasons that I've learned people engaged in fandom still don't necessarily like resonate with me personally, which is not meaningful in any way, right? Like that doesn't have to be the case. But yeah, I do feel like I have a better understanding of what those reasons are. Now, there is one reason that we came across that we did not talk about in the podcast because it didn't come up in scholarly literature, and I think we do just want to touch on it briefly. But it came up in response, not directly to us, to our Ships We're Not Covering episode.
Yeah, we like witnessed a little bit of Tumblr discussion about something that neither of us had like really considered before, and it intrigued us. So obviously, by the very nature of this podcast being about queer baiting, we've been coming at the idea of shipping from like the what's on the screen perspective, if you will. So both of us, I think, sort of inherently viewed shipping as a thing people did for characters that had on-screen chemistry or were, you know, there was a lot of subtext to their relationship, all things that the writers and the actors are like actively putting onto the screen.
Yes.
But when we did our Ships We're Not Covering episode, we saw some discussion about one of the ships we discussed, Mycroft and Lestrade from Sherlock, BBC Sherlock, which I think was really intriguing to us because it was people talking about shipping in a way that we had not heard discussed before.
Yes. So I guess just to briefly recap, I think our perspective on that ship was, you know, there's not a ton of evidence for it in the text of the show, but you know, you can kind of have an understanding like, oh, Lestrade breaks down Mycroft's walls, and like that's sort of the trajectory. And what we saw was like, yes, that's correct, but the reason a lot of the people in the comments were attracted to those two characters is because they related to them, and then I guess by extension wanted to ship them.
Right. So it was people were coming at it obviously like, if anybody disagrees with how we're characterizing their comments, let us know. But the vibe we got was like, I myself really identify with these characters. Like, you know, say middle-aged person who is like really done with everyone's shit. And I just like identify with the personalities of both Mycroft and Lestrade. And therefore, I like the idea of the two of them together because I like empathize with them, which was a version of shipping. Like, obviously there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people can ship whatever characters they want for any possible reason, but I think it was just not how the two of us had conceptualized shipping before.
Right. That was a new motivation, and it wasn't something that had come up in the literature we had read either. So someone needs to incorporate that into the scholarly work as well.
Yeah. If any people who write about fandom and shipping are listening to this, like, this is something to look into, because there was not one, not two, but like several people who all talked about this being a reason that they ship Mycroft and Lestrade. So, I mean, fascinating.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, even more close to your heart, you had your own personal shipping fandom, you know, experience over the course of this. So please talk to me about our beloved Starsky and Hutch.
I would love to talk to you about Starsky and Hutch. So yeah, I think you had raised this even before we watched any Starsky and Hutch as a potential way for me to get into shipping and fan fiction sort of beyond where I was, which was like, you know, we said it in the intro to this podcast, like, yes, we all watch things and see a lot of evidence on screen. We're like, oh yeah, they should kiss. But how do we get me to that next step? I think.
Yeah. How do we get you to the place where it's like, yeah, they should kiss, and I want to see someone, you know, tell me how that might happen or whatever.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you had said I needed to get to a place where I love the characters more than the content of the show. And that is a rare thing for me, because usually when I love something, I kind of love it wholly, and I'm like, I love this whole thing. And in line with the conversation we had in the Star Trek episode of like, I don't want to read a thing that's not the whole thing. But as we discussed in our Starsky and Hutch episode, right, like the fan fiction itself is often like an episode of the show, because it's her comfort. The show is entirely her comfort.
I mean, not entirely, but mostly.
It's largely her comfort, Or even if it's, you know, a fluffy, not AU necessarily, but like a fluffy story. Like sometimes the boys are undercover and they're just having a good time. And it's a real fluffy time.
On the show. Because they have so much fun every time they're undercover.
But, you know, as again, if you didn't listen to our Starsky and Hutch episode, you really should. It's a great episode.
Yeah, I mean, stop listening to this episode and go back and listen to that one because it was a whole experience.
Yes, and you can see our journey with it as well there, or here rather. And then, yeah, the other thing with Starsky and Hutch is because it's so episodic, there are all these significant gaps in the story.
Significant gaps. Like, well, because not only is it episodic, it's like truly episodic. Like the things that happen in an episode have no bearing on the things that happen in other episodes, to the point where, as we discussed, like Hutch gets forcibly addicted to heroin in one of the episodes, to the point where he is like strung out and offering information about his girlfriend because he needs heroin so much. And then they dry him out in the episode and it's never mentioned again.
Yes.
And it's like, you know that the heroin addiction did not just go away forever.
Or there's a two-parter where there's this huge conspiracy where people are getting new identities and being kidnapped and like brainwashed in this facility. And they're like, I guess we'll never find out who did that. And you're like, I guess we won't.
And that story in particular led to a fic that we discussed on the episode, like a legendary Starsky and Hutch fic called Mojave Crossing, that stepped in to be like, we need to know what was going on here. So,
and then on top of even that, right, there's season 4, which is itself just like a baffling thing that needs to be explained. So you can kind of come at the Starsky and Hutch fan fiction from all these different directions that I do appreciate, of like explaining inconsistencies, explaining just like who was brainwashing all those people, and really feeling like an episode of the show. Yeah. And Starsky and Hutch are so well characterized that I think, you know,
and all the while it's
not to say it's really easy to write anything, but it's relatively easy to get their voices and be like, yep, that sounds like Starsky.
But also it's just that like they're so lovable. Like I just want to spend time with them all the time, like more than there is of the show. I want Starsky and Hutch hanging out constantly. All of the episodes of the show are not enough Starsky and Hutch. But I think all of that goes hand in hand with like, the show has many flaws. It is not a perfect piece of media. There are episodes that no one should ever watch of that show.
Yeah.
The characters are so great, and it is something that, you know, is worth putting in the time to like make more perfect, I guess, if you have the ability to do so. So I'm delighted. That whole experience has been great. I'm so glad that Monica suggested that we watch it. I feel like my life is enriched because we watched it, and it made the goal of the podcast happen because you had your own fandom experience.
I did. Yeah, we definitely joked like, if for no other reason, the fact that we got introduced to Starsky and Hutch was enough reason to do this podcast. Like, obviously we did it for other reasons and we had a good time, but oh boy.
Maybe you had a good time. I thought every other episode of this podcast was torture.
What an outcome.
What an outcome. So bless them. Love Starsky and Hutch. Super happy that they're in my life now. And, I just want him around.
Under what other circumstances would you ever have watched Starsky and Hutch?
Probably none. I mean, I'm sure I watched the Ben Stiller Owen Wilson movie when it came out in 2004, but if that didn't drag you into the fandom, which apparently it did drag a lot of people into the fandom.
Which
there was
great.
A Starsky and Hutch resurgence in 2004, but if that didn't do it, I don't think either of us were ever gonna find it, because it's not something that you come across. You really have to seek it out. It's not streaming on any in any normal way. So
thanks again, Monica.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you. So yeah, I think that's been a worthwhile outcome of the podcast, is that you have a greater appreciation and understanding of transformational fandom.
I do.
Look at that. I guess we could stop there, but we won't. We have so much more to say.
We do. We've learned other things. We've done also, you know, we talked about at the beginning of the podcast wanting to track some potential patterns around the types of fics that were most popular within different fandoms. So we're going to wrap back around to that as well. Right now.
And right now. come back later for that right now. This has been an interesting one because when we started the podcast, and I think this was wholly an accident that this ended up happening, but
Absolutely.
the first several episodes that we did, we found that the most kudos fic, which is the one that obviously we talked about in every episode, in a bunch of ships in a row, was like a short, couple thousand words fic, not explicit, super fluffy, just like the guys hanging out together and then maybe kissing was like the premise of all of the first fics that we read. And so we started to get this theory going in our minds, like maybe for every fandom the most popular fic is going to be short and fluffy and not explicit, because that's just the thing that like the most people can read and like, which in theory might actually be true. I don't, that might be a true fact, but that didn't bear itself out in the results of what the most kudos fic is. The results that we got, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not entirely sure what they mean. So what we will do is give you just like the stats, the initial results, and then see if we can draw anything of significance out of them. So we counted up the number of most popular fic in each of the fandoms that are either long or explicit or short and fluffy. So like neither of those things. And where we came out is, I guess there were the fewest who had long fics as their most popular. There were 5 of the 16 we will be talking about that had a long fic at the top. And I guess let's see if there's anything that these have in common. The 5 are Supernatural, Gotham, Hannibal, Teen Wolf, and Starsky and Hutch. Do we want to discuss these now, or do you want me to run through everything?
Let's discuss them now.
Okay. So to me, what jumps out about these is at least 4 of the 5 are like similar in my mind. You've got genre, like, for lack of a better word, like geek shows with Supernatural, Gotham, Hannibal, Teen Wolf. I find to be pretty, you know, like obviously they vary, but similar.
They're also like dark, and by that I don't mean like gritty. I also mean like they take place at night.
That's true. They are night shows. Maybe that's the answer. Starsky and Hutch also is such like a niche thing that I guess I also would probably throw it into like a, you know, it's not like a mainstream, you know, fandom. And a lot of it takes place at night, to be fair.
Yeah.
So whatever that means, those are the ones with the long.
We didn't put that in my notes. I just realized that all these shows take place at night. Night equals long.
Night equals long. So then when we look at fandoms that had explicit content in their most popular fics, we come out at about like half-ish of them, 7 of the 16. So those are Hannibal, Leverage, James Bond, Hawaii Five-0, Gotham, Starsky and Hutch, Supernatural, and our, oh no, that's the 7. We did notice explicit content in the fic for things that we're not really talking about. Like there was some explicit content in the fic we read for our 80s action movies episode, and in our comedies episode, and in our Lord of the Rings episode, but none of those were like specific fandoms that were easily quantifiable. So
we pulled out Lord of the Rings because I think we didn't really use AO3, or maybe we did, but like
we used AO3, but we weren't talking about one ship in particular,
right?
And you know, it was just because I definitely read some stuff for Gimli and Legolas and some stuff for Merry and Pippin, and it was just like not clean. So we're removing that one from the statistics. So that's about half, whatever that tells you. And then on the other side, the fandoms that had short fluffy fics as their most kudos, also 7 out of 16. So those are the MCU, Star Wars, Good Omens, Harry Potter, Sherlock, X-Men, and Star Trek. So we're split down the middle there, interestingly. I guess we tried to look at like where if there's something in common with where each of these groups fell on the queer baiting scale.
There really
wasn't.
I
don't know that there is. Not really. I don't know that there's anything like related about the content of the shows. I guess the short fluffy ones, most of our like super mainstream fandoms fall there. So MCU and Star Wars and Harry Potter and X-Men And, you know, it's funny to me that Star Trek is here. That is popular, but I also feel like it belongs in the geek shows. So, I don't know. I mean, does anything jump out at you as like a conclusion here, or is the answer just it's all random?
Yeah, I think the answer is there wasn't a pattern. So like, you know, which is fine. Sometimes you do a little science and you're like, our results are
No
I don't know.
results. I really, what I feel like would be helpful, like if we were actually scientists who actually studied this, what you would want to do is like a full survey of each of the fandoms, right? Like, because
Yes.
whatever is the most kudos is not necessarily significant. It might be the most kudos by a couple votes. It might be like an outlier because it's written by this one very specifically popular writer or something. It doesn't necessarily speak to the content of all
Sure.
of the works.
No, I think that's fair. This is not a rigorous analysis of these fandoms. This was you know, just we saw what we saw, and based on what we did, I can't say anything. Like if you presented me with a fandom, I would not feel comfortable trying to make a prediction about what kind of fic would be the most kudos.
I think what's really funny and interesting about it is just that we got so many of them in a row at the start. Like, this is not something we probably would have even been thinking about if we hadn't noticed a trend at the beginning that ended up just being random statistical noise. I don't know that there's anything to draw from this, but I am intrigued.
It's, you know, it's not interesting. I just don't know what any of it means.
I'm glad we revisited it because we did set out from basically the very beginning to track that, and we tracked it. Oh boy, did we track it.
Yep.
Another question that we have discussed a lot over the course of this podcast is, what is canon? Like, all of the various facets of this. Who decides what's canon? You know, are there different definitions based on fandom, based on who's talking about it? All of these are there like different levels of canon? Can things be like kind of canon? Are all the questions that we've discussed. So has a specific answer jumped out to you as like, here is definitively what canon is?
Well, I feel most comfortable with, despite some recent examples, that what is in the text, what you see on the screen, is canon. I guess I'm kind of in the Neil Gaiman school of things, right? And like anything outside of the text, not as much canon.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We've discussed all of these various types of canon because obviously there's what's on screen, but we've also had a lot of discussions about like word of God canon. So like if the creator of the show says it's canon, even though it's only maybe implied on screen, does that mean that it's canon? Or are the fans allowed to be like, well, what does the writer know? Yes. And if the fans are allowed to be like, well, what does the writer know? That leads into Death of the Author, which we also have talked about a lot. Because does the writer get to decide? I feel like people have come out on various sides of this in each fandom we've been in, depending on their relationship with the author. It's funny how authors get more credible when they say things that you agree with.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Also, I think there's the question of like, you know, not to be crass, but do they need to kiss or whatever for it to be canon? Like,
right.
Is a love confession canon? Supernatural. Or like, is very unsubtle subtext canon, right?
Yes.
There's such a interesting line.
Well, I think part of this question is too, like, you know, for TV and movies, for visual media, what counts as representation? If, you know, a character says, I'm gay, but the show never allows that character to act on that, is that actually sufficient representation for TV?
I think.
Yeah, I know, like it can vary, and we've talked about this, right? Like,
yes,
if all the straight couples are making out, and you have this one gay couple, and they never kiss or touch, you're like,
yeah, I think that's probably insufficient representation. Yes. But obviously, context rules all, because if it's a show where, you know, some character says they're gay, but they never make out with anyone, but like nobody else ever makes out with anyone either, and that's not a part of the show, I think you're like, okay, cool. Like, glad there's representation on this children's animated show where nobody makes out with anyone or like whatever
Yes.
you're talking about. So yeah.
And it also gets into the conversation we've had around, queerness of the Good Omens characters are maybe romantically in love, but asexual, right? Like that's still representation, potentially, right? They don't want to define what they are.
There wouldn't be, says Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. He acknowledges he's dead as the author.
Exactly.
But I think that some of that question is around like within, because I think we've had, some differences of opinion with some of the examples of like, is this sufficient as representation within the context of this thing? Like, I think, the Hannibal example is a great one because it is such a sensual, sexual show. And the amount of representation we get from Will and Hannibal is not there.
We do get women sleeping with each other on that show.
That's true.
There's queer representation. But the Hannibal Will thing, I mean, it's all very... Their romance is very mental.
Yes.
But it's interesting too because I feel like one of the things we thought was like pretty good representation was Gotham, which is completely unrequited.
Right.
But very much like canon on-screen queer representation.
Yes.
Even though the person he's in love with is not in love with him.
Well, that can happen. That can just happen.
It does happen. So obviously...
It depends.
It depends. Like everything else. It depends. But I think what I have found to be interesting about that as we've gone through the process is that I feel like what fandom thinks of as canon is different from fandom to fandom.
Yes.
Like, so that has been interesting. I feel like it is a thing that each group of fans gets together and decides on their own. And so I think maybe the moral of the story is like, canon is what the fans decide it is more than anything else. If the writer says this is canon and the fans say no, it's not, then like,
well, I think it's unfortunately like anything else. What you believe to be true is up to you as an individual. Like that's the reality that we live in. So again, right, you could put something on screen that very clearly has romantic overtones and people can walk away from it and say, oh, it could be anything. And you go, I don't think that's anything. I feel like you're gaslighting me, but I guess in a post-truth world, could be anything. Whatever what the text says.
Facts. It's rough. But anyway, I don't know. If the obviously the fans don't even speak with one voice either. Obviously, right. we are talking about Supernatural as we say all these subtle things, and there are different opinions within that fandom about what canon is. So.
Yeah, and some fans will say, well, the writer said this, and some people will say, well, the writer doesn't understand what they wrote, which can also truly happen.
Has been true. Has been true many times.
So the answer still becomes, it depends, right?
Yep.
And you can debate it. It's all debatable. So we don't have an answer of what canon is.
It changes all the time.
I have a personal answer of what I generally feel canon is, but I don't know that means anything again.
No. Canon is whatever you decide for yourself. Yeah. So I'm intrigued by the whole concept. I mean, obviously it's not like an actual concrete thing. It's a social construct or whatever. We're all making it up as we go. So another thing that we talked about a lot that I think bears touching on in this discussion is both femslash and like representation of non-white people in these various fandoms.
Yes, that was very interesting to learn about as well as we were going through this.
I mean, obviously I don't think it was like hugely shocking to either of us that sexism and racism exist in fandom as they exist everywhere else. But it was like pretty depressing how stark it was looking at the list, like the AO3 top 100 ships and seeing how few femslash ships there are. And the fact that Finpo had the only black character on that list and that's going to go away next year because we already looked at the upcoming most popular of the year ships and
they're about to overtake them. Yeah, that's a bummer for a number of reasons, but
it's rough, guys. It's real rough out there.
Like, these are people producing as a hobby. Like, do whatever you want. But
yeah, obviously we can't demand
Not a
that anyone
critique
writes anything.
of an
It is
individual.
Right. It's just a critique of a
collective.
But yeah, running the numbers on both of those things has been unpleasant over the course of this podcast. Save Finpo. And it's like, that one makes me maybe the angriest of all of them, because I love Finpo. The property could not be more mainstream or popular. The people making it, meaning Oscar Isaac and John Boyega, could not have done more to like help you along with trying to ship them. And still we end up with Hux and Kai Lux, Armitage Hux and Kylo Ren as a more popular ship than the two of them. It's infuriating.
And again, not to be critical of anyone's appearance, but Oscar Isaac and John Boyega are so attractive.
Yeah, we're not being critical of anyone else. We're just being positive about Oscar Isaac and John Boyega. They're beautiful, beautiful men. I don't understand. People don't like to look at them. I don't get it.
No, it's I can't process it, because it's like, yeah, and they clearly are very in love in that film. Oscar Isaac is doing the most.
He's doing the most. Did you not watch the net clutching? He could not have given you more. He's leaving it all out on the field, guys. I don't know. I will never understand Kylux. And no one has so far met my challenge to come at me with their reasons that they ship Kylux. So maybe we just don't have any listeners who ship them, or you're all cowards, because
wow.
I want someone to debate me.
I mean, as we said, of course, anyone can ship anyone for any reasons. It's very hard.
Do you think that people who ship Kylux do it because they identify with Kylo Ren and Armitage Hux?
I mean, I don't know. We need someone to tell us. It's just very hard for us to understand why you would choose them when Finpo.
I don't think it's that hard to understand. I think the reason is that people like Adam Driver.
But they don't like Oscar Isaac?
That part is inexplicable, but the part where people are drawn to white men is, clearly borne out through all of the rest of this show.
But also, why aren't people shipping Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac, or Adam Driver and John Boyega, or
do they ever interact? Not that means anything, but but do they ever interact?
Yeah, at the beginning of the first one, Kylo's the one who's captured Oscar Isaac.
Oh.
And John Boyega lightsaber fights Kylo in the first one.
Sounds like sexual tension to
me. No one could see me, but I'm doing lightsaber moves as I'm saying that.
I could see it, and I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Anyway, inexplicable, infuriating, but I guess we just have to accept it and move on. Otherwise, I'll never be able to get anything else done.
Yes, yeah.
But now let's take a moment, I think, to talk about the winners and losers of the pod. Who came out looking shitty and who came out looking great. And then we'll also talk about some surprises, because I think there were some things that surprised us. So who do we think are the winners of the pod?
We've talked about them before. We've talked about them already. Number one winner, Oscar Isaac.
I mean, Oscar Isaac. No one in the world could be doing more for you, fandom members, than Oscar Isaac. The man is out here single-handedly, running this ship in the press, constantly talking about how we should ship them. They should be together. They should kiss. They're in love. I'm doing my best for you people. That's all he talks about all the time.
No one is supporting him.
Well, John Boyega is supporting him. But other than that...
It's not supporting him. They're writing Kylux.
Oh my god. Yeah, the fandom's not even supporting him. He's here for you, fandom, and you don't even appreciate him. How dare you? I want this rest of this episode just being me shaming fandom members. Can that be the rest?
I know we said at the top again, and we do truly believe it's your hobby. We're not criticizing you as an individual.
But I am criticizing you as a collective.
Could you not get behind Oscar Isaac?
I don't know. He's so sweet. He's so cute. He's so nice. He's so into shipping himself with John Boyega. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
He referred to Timothée Chalamet as his sweet baby boy. Like, the man can do no wrong.
Come on, guys.
Come on. All right. So, Oscar #1, winner slot. He gets the gold medal. I don't know who could possibly unseat him.
Oscar
But
Isaac.
some other winners, because on this pod, there can be multiple winners.
Yeah.
And one of them, I think, is Neil Gaiman.
Absolutely.
I don't think people will be shocked because we have like referred to him in a lot of episodes since we did the Good Omens episode as like maybe the only example of a showrunner who mostly got it right because of his whole I am the author and I am dead.
Yes.
Don't ask me anything. I have no answers for you.
What I put on the screen, and that's all I got for you. And anything else is an equal authority in interpretation. So
yeah, he's like, we can all theorize. I have my own potential ideas about what is happening with them, but I'm no more right than you are because all that exists is what's right there on screen, which I think is a pretty good move.
Yeah. It's hard to argue with, you know?
Yeah. Some other winners are from our most beloved show are Paul Michael Glaser and David Soul, or Starsky and Hutch from Starsky and Hutch. Yeah. Both of them are, you know, champions, doing it in the 70s, stuff that people can't even do today. David Soul was out there accepting People's Choice Awards and talking about basically how their relationship is a very special relationship between men that people don't get to see on screen, you know?
Yeah, that the show is about two men in love.
Yeah, in the 70s he's saying this. And Paul Michael Glaser, more recently, like this year maybe, talking about, you know, how friends can be in love, basically. Like, if he's saying, if we have to define ourselves as straight, I mean, I want every 70-something-year-old man to be out here talking about why do we need to define ourselves? Yeah. I guess if you pressed me on it, I'd say I'm
backed
straight,
me into a corner. Fine, I'm straight. But, you know, we can all be in love with our friends.
Best friends, exactly. Come on. These guys are the allies that we deserve. Yes. Or need but don't deserve. I can never get that Batman quote correct. Some other winners from
in a very similar vein.
Yeah, from another old ship are William Shatner and Gene Roddenberry from our old classic Star Trek days.
As we talked about in the Star Trek episode, Bill Shatner, we all know him. He's a character. Sometimes you were like, yeah, Bill. And sometimes you're like, no,
Bill.
But he's always Bill Shatner. And again, in the 70s, he was just on talk shows being like, Spock and Kirk are gay. Deal with it.
Love you, Bill. And then Gene Roddenberry out here talking about how basically the only reason the two of them aren't in a relationship is that, you know, Jim Kirk needs to have sex more than once every 7 years.
Yeah, but they're two halves of a single soul, and, you know, and you're like, all right.
Sounds like representation to me.
Again, why are we doing this in the 70s? But some folks struggle to do it today in 2021. 51 years later.
It's inexplicable. Our last winner, we already mentioned it earlier, but Gotham. Yeah. Shockingly, a winner on this list. I never would have seen it coming. I didn't know anything about the ship before we watched the show. And I think it's pretty good representation.
Again, just a terribly bizarre example of something where you think you have a canon confession of queer male love on the show, and it doesn't sort of reverberate through the internet as far as we were aware.
Honestly, I'm really working under the theory now that once you make something canon, people just don't care anymore. Yeah. it's old news once
it diffuses the energy, because then people are like, well, okay, we did it. Moving on to the next thing that we have to fight for. Exactly. And yeah, you know, we've said a million times, it is unrequited, but we get to see the characters deal with it and their journey forward. And it's not, you know, it's a thing that could happen.
Yes, that's what's wild about it. And also the fact that it is queer, though it is like explicitly canonically queer, the fact that it's queer is not a part of the story at all.
Right.
It's just like a thing that's true about them that doesn't affect anything. Like his friend's not in love with him, but it's not because he's like homophobic. He's just not in love with him. So
yeah,
it's a shame, but it is what it is.
Sometimes that happens.
Love you, Gotham. Great work. Let's get to some losers, because honestly, I think there were way more of these over the course of the podcast, which I guess isn't a surprise since we were focusing on specific instances of queer baiting.
Yeah.
But some of them definitely stood out as being worse than others. And I think the biggest loser, in my mind, is pretty clear. I don't know if you agree with me here, but J.K. Rowling jumps out as
at the top of the table.
Just the worst person for so many reasons.
This was one of our first sort of canon mindfucks where we were like, okay, Dumbledore is word of God, to our point earlier, right? Canonically queer. There is nothing really in the story, the original books, to indicate this. And then we get to additional story once we've declared him as being canonically gay, and not only is it not really represented in the story, it's also like horrible gay stereotypes. And you're like, oh boy.
Well, and also it is maybe the most textbook case of queer baiting that we discussed in this whole podcast, because it's literally J.K. Rowling out there saying like, they are gay. They're gay. Just like tune in and maybe you'll see them kiss, but then you tune in and there's no representation at all.
Yeah.
Like it's I've never seen anyone do queer baiting this unsubtly.
It's pretty crazy.
It's amazing. So add that to the list of J.K. Rowling's flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And another honorable mention for me as one of our worst offenders is J.J. Abrams. And really, I only say this because I'm in love with his quote.
That quote.
About Finpo. We've heard a lot of people say a bunch of garbled nonsense about their ships, but that was an early example for us and really just sort of like exemplified the whole genre of quote about
we made it
shipping characters.
The banner of our Tumblr.
Yeah. If you've been on our Tumblr, you've seen the quote because it really stuck with us and just,
it's amazing.
It's amazing. Another person who stands out as someone who went out of his way to piss off fans in an unpleasant way is Mark Gatiss of Sherlock fame. I don't know why we're saying just Mark Gatiss.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we didn't put Stephen Moffat on this.
Stephen Moffat is bad too. I think that one of our Mark Gatiss quotes was like worse than the Stephen Moffat quote. But
Mark Gatiss is the one who was really like, why should I write a gay detective?
Yeah. Well, and Mark Gatiss is, we probably shouldn't be holding him to this standard because we've talked about how it's shitty, but Mark Gatiss is also gay and is the one being like, why should we have gay representation in my show? Someone else could write that show.
Okay.
But yeah, so Moftis generally, both of them, seem to delight in pissing off the fans. It's its own new fascinating genre of queer baiting where they're out there adamantly yelling at the fans saying that there's nothing gay going on here as they continually write gayer and gayer television.
Yeah. And also put commentary in the show that is critical of fans shipping the characters. It's very adversarial. I think this is one of, if not the most adversarial relationships we saw. Like, as bad as J.K. Rowling is, and obviously there's a lot of reasons for fans to be upset with her.
Yeah.
It's not quite what's happening with Sherlock.
It's like they think fans of their show are dumb for liking their show. It's like this weird...
Yeah.
I don't even know what the dynamic is there, but they seem to actively dislike people who watch the show that they make. Another person who definitely doesn't get along with his fans and seems like a not great person in real life is
his
Peter
fans,
Lankov.
The people he works with.
Anyone he ever interacts with in real life. Yeah. Peter Lankov of Hawaii Five-0 definitely seemed to relish the, you guys are interested in shipping my guys? Oh, tune in. Maybe something will happen. Oh, no, fuck you. Steve was always going to end up with the woman who is hardly in the show. I don't know, guys.
You know what we didn't put in our losers in our outline, but probably should be there? Teen Wolf.
Oh yeah, I mean that got rough. That's some pretty active queer baiting. Also, that one's a sad story because it's like the decline of the relationship between the creator and fans, where it started so promising, and
it
it was
really
like
did.
him being like, "Ooh, what's shipping? Oh, shipping's fun. I ship things. This is great. I'm really into it." And then it turned into like, "Stop watching my show, except watch my show." Like they're only putting Steric stuff in the finale episodes of things so that people will tune in for the next season. Like just rough, just all around bad.
Yeah. It's like Gotham achieved what Teen Wolf wanted to do.
It's true. It's true. What if they had, because Styles is, in my mind, canonically bisexual. What if they had him have like a crush on Derek, and then Derek had to be like, "I'm flattered, but no," and then that was like the thing, and then everyone would have felt validated, like we saw all this chemistry, and the chemistry was there, but apparently it was all on Styles' side, and they could have just moved past it.
They could have done that. They could have Gothamed.
Oh man, opportunity lost. Gosh. Okay, and then our biggest loser in the show category is Supernatural. I don't know that people will be surprised by this, having just listened to 4 episodes of us talking about Supernatural.
And I don't know what else we want to say about it, or we probably shouldn't get back into it because
it's not, because it could derail this whole thing. I will say that, like the J.K. Rowling thing, is another situation of something being canon and the worst queer baiting you've ever seen at the same time.
Yeah, you guys did.
Like remarkable that that's possible, and we've seen it more than once, but we have. It is possible, and it's infuriating every time.
It really is the worst. Please stop.
Yeah, but on to a more, I guess, potentially pleasant note. What were the surprises of the podcast? Some were good and some were bad surprises.
Yeah, so this was just things that along the course of us doing this podcast, we were exactly that, surprised by, right? So one thing was just like either bad or confusing endings. You know, Supernatural comes to mind in the bad ending category. And I think the thing that's spectacular about Supernatural is it is somehow a worse ending than Hawaii Five-0, which
you thought would be the worst ending when we did that episode.
Seemed hard to beat in terms of incomprehensibility.
The Supernatural writers saw that challenge and met and exceeded it, you know?
They really did. They said,
remarkable.
How can we not wrap up things satisfyingly? What could we...
Whenever we have the opportunity to wrap things up in a satisfying manner, let's do the opposite.
But also, like, in Hawaii Five-0's defense, as you have mentioned, they were, like, maybe going to continue with a different cast. Like, there were some balls that were in the air, but Supernatural knew it was ending. So, like...
They knew for so long. Wow. They had so much time to prepare. And boy, they just... fucked it up. But in the confusing endings category, I think you probably would like to talk about the ending of
Spectre.
What's the movie? Spectre. I was like, James Bond, that one. Spectre.
So this ending is not necessarily bad in the way the Hawaii Five-0 or Supernatural endings were. Also, it wasn't the ending, right? I haven't seen No Time to Die still, so I don't know what happens in that movie. But my mind is still blown by it. I've never been more confused by choices made and what they could possibly mean than the end of Spectre, where Bond comes back to talk to Q. They have a weirdly, like, tentative, flirty, romantic conversation, and then it cuts to him in his car, and there's a pan reveal, and it's the woman he already walked off with, and you're like, what is this?
I don't know. It will never be explained. Also, I think the greater surprise of that one to me was just that we didn't end up thinking that OOQ was complete and utter bullshit. Because I think, as we said in that episode, when we started this podcast and conceived of the queer baiting scale from 1 to 5, in our minds, what a 1 was OOQ.
Yeah. And again, I rewatched Skyfall and I was like, I'm still there. I'm not really getting it. Again, Bond and Tanner. Oh boy, did they have chemistry.
Tanner. They had chemistry.
But yeah, I got to that ending, and I was just like, you know what, guys? I don't know what's happening here.
So yeah, that was a fun surprise. I always like when we come in with preconceived notions and then change our minds.
It's always nice to be,
a pleasant surprise, as we've already discussed several times now, is just Gotham and how delightful that was, and how we didn't know that there was canon queer representation on a DC superhero show on Fox.
And again, like you said, it was beyond Nick Mobblepot, right? There's other canonical queer representation on that show, which is cool.
The surprise for us was just like all of the things that happen with Grindeldor. I think we teed it up in the episode when we talked about this, but we had planned to do a Harry Potter episode, but we didn't know what that Harry Potter episode would be, because we figured it would be like Drarry. That seems like what people talk about a lot. And then having
another plug for
Drapple. Once we discovered Drapple, we were like, can we make a whole episode out of Drapple? Seems like a stretch, but would be worthwhile. But then when we stumbled upon Grindeldor, we were like, oh, this is shocking. We knew nothing about it. And also it's just like what this podcast was made for.
Right, yeah. That was like in the outlining phase, the one that we most like broke. We had like an epiphany as we were.
Oh, it was an epiphany.
Trying to develop that.
And then the best surprise of all was just Starsky and Hutch. Just the existence of Starsky and Hutch.
We've said it again. We've said it many times since we watched it.
The intense way in which we fell in love with that show.
It's precious to us now.
Wonderful. Another question that we asked ourselves a lot over the course of this podcast was, is there like a right thing for a creator to do in this situation? Like if you're writing a show, you're writing a movie, people start saying, hey, those two characters that are, like those two guys, those two gals should really get together. We like them. What then are you supposed to do?
So this is a synthesis of what we've learned, I suppose, in many ways.
There are a few options, I guess, of paths to take that are potentially not bad. Honestly, I will start this by saying I don't think there is a perfect answer, because this is a minefield to navigate.
It is. Option number 1, do your art. Don't answer questions.
Yes. If at all possible, truly the best person that you can be in this situation is Bruno Heller, who we haven't mentioned yet, but Bruno
does
Heller
anyone even remember who Bruno Heller is?
No, he was always there and never there. Bruno Heller is our Gotham showrunner, who seemingly like maybe doesn't exist. It's hard to say. I don't know if he never in his life got asked a question about Nick Mobblepot. I don't know. Like, obviously none of the writers really had a lot to say about that ship, but he in particular was like, nothing to say, wasn't asked, couldn't find anything. If possible, just don't be around. Just
never.
There's no one ever asks you a question.
You never have to answer any questions, and then you're fine.
I mean, he came out smelling like a daisy, right? Like, there's no one in the fandom who's like, fuck Bruno Heller for this. Like, I didn't see that once. Nope. Another potentially good option, as we already discussed, is to go the Neil Gaiman route and be like, I'm the author, but I'm super dead, so like, don't ask me any questions because I don't know. That's potentially a good path. I mean, I think that is a thing a lot of people try to do, but you really have to be doing it in good faith, because I think that it's apparent when people start to be like, I don't know, it could be anything. Like, that sometimes reads
I think probably what you have to do is, you can't have that response to only the question about what's happening with queer representation in your show.
100%.
If you're willing to answer speculative questions about everything else except for that, and be like, it's up to interpretation, that seems fake. As long as you're consistent across all kinds of questions, you're in a much better situation for it to be honestly like, this is just how I feel as an author. I put my art out into the world. I understand it's a conversation and you will have a take on it, but that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, don't open yourself up to accusations of hypocrisy. And the way to do that is to just be like consistent. If unfortunately you are forced to answer questions, if Bruno Heller is not the route for you, a thing that is good to do if you are not the creator of a show, but someone else involved in the creation of the show, say a cast member, is to be a cheerleader for the ship because, why the hell not? Be Oscar Isaac. Obviously, you're not writing it. No one can hold you accountable for not giving them canon representation, but he can still be out there saying, like, I support you. I'm on board. And that's the best thing someone in his position can do.
Yeah.
Generally, I think advice for everyone in these situations, you gotta be honest about your intentions and about what you're doing. Because truly, if you never have any intention of making these two characters get together or whatever, you have to be honest about that. Like you can't play the game of maybe, who knows, tune in next week, because people are gonna get tired of that very quickly. They're
gonna get angry. But you also have to walk the walk in the show. So you can't do that and then continue to write in queer baiting within the show. So
yeah, it's both of the things together. You have to be saying they're never going to get together, and you have to be writing the show in a way where it is clear that they are never going to get together. You cannot do the Sherlock thing. You cannot do the Stucky thing. You can't be making the show or the movie more and more subtextually queer while saying to the public, we don't understand what you're talking about. They're not going to get together.
Yes.
Because that's one of the worst things you could do. It's so frustrating.
It is.
But honestly, I express my sympathy for people who are in these situations. Really, I guess we didn't even say this, but the best thing you can do is just let the boys kiss, right?
Absolutely.
Nobody is going to fault you if you just take these characters and make them canon.
Then you'll get Gotham, where you made it canon and everyone is like, okay.
Yeah, great. Love it. I mean, we have not ever, like with Supernatural, we got maddeningly close and then they went in a completely opposite direction. But we still have not gotten an example of a show where people are writing these characters. They never intended for them to have chemistry, but they did have chemistry. Everyone loved them. And then they became canon. I mean, that happens all the time with straight couples, we'll say. But I have not seen that happen with queer couples.
But that's a great thing. If someone can think of an example of that,
please
send it to us.
I'm wrong. I've never seen this happen with guys. It did happen on Glee.
Right.
With Brittany and Santana.
Yes. But if there are other examples, let us know. And I think that would be a fun thing if that exists to visit in our season 2 as an example of, they did let the boys kiss. Yay. Yeah. What happened here? What's the story?
I think that the biphobia, particularly surrounding men, is too strong. Yeah. And as soon as you've established a male character as having any interest in women, it just cannot possibly enter into anyone's mind that they might also have interest in men. But I hope I'm wrong. So as you said, send us examples if you know of any. God, Supernatural, why did they fuck it up so much? They got so close.
We talked about it for 4.5 hours, Maddie.
Okay. I mean, I could talk about it more, but we shouldn't talk about it more for this pod.
We could definitely talk about it more. And guess what, guys? We will, just not in a recording, because I don't know. I hope you all enjoyed our 4-hour discussion of Supernatural, but on the off chance you didn't, I don't want to force you to listen to more of it.
Oof. Anyway, every time I think of Supernatural, I have to take a moment to get into a different headspace. But yeah, that's all the advice I have for people. It's hard. I sympathize, but being honest and just doing your best. just do your best, people.
Just do your best. Be honest. Or, be Bruno Heller and don't ever get asked any questions about your art.
I honestly don't understand it. He's like a mystical creature, but good for him. I think a last thing to talk about is, do we feel like things in the queer baiting landscape are improving generally? Do we think that there's less intentional queer baiting? Do we think that, obviously I think there's more canonical representation as time goes by, but I don't know that necessarily means that there's less queer baiting.
The thing, and I'm sure we mentioned this in one of our many Supernatural episodes, that I struggle with is how David Soul in the 70s could be like, this is a show about two men who love each other and have a very particular relationship. And Bill Shatner joking, not joking, whatever, can go on a talk show and be like, they're gay. But Jared and Jensen and Misha have to like flop, sweat, panic.
It is a flop, sweat, panic. And what's crazy to me about it is that they know it's going to happen and they never are prepared.
Yeah. So like I mean, some things are better, some things are not, but like it doesn't feel as linear as I would have liked it to feel.
No.
With that.
Well, here's what I think. A thought I'm just having now. Obviously, we've talked about how queerbaiting is like a recent phenomenon because it's a marketing strategy as much as anything else. And it wasn't until very recently that it was perceived as profitable to market to gay audiences. I just think queerbaiting's not going away because attracting queer audiences is more important than ever. But we haven't gotten to a place in society where like homophobia doesn't exist. So there's definitely still this prevailing like,
and to your point, biphobia, right?
Oh, 1000%. Which is so funny because I'm still struck. I think every once in a while it comes into my mind, that thing we learned from the FemSlash episode about how many like young people and young women in particular are bisexual, and it's just like tons and tons and tons of them now. So yeah, the biphobia is like the thing that makes queerbaiting for men in particular, I think, happen so much. But I also just think it's not going away until we get to a place where like it's not an issue. It wouldn't be an issue for anyone to think of these two guys getting together. But I don't know when we're getting to that.
All right. Do we have any other wrap-up thoughts?
I wish we'd ended on a more positive note.
Yeah, we should have put winners at the end.
Oh,
guys, watch Starsky and Hutch.
Watch Starsky and Hutch.
Support Oscar Isaac.
One lesson, yes. Support Oscar Isaac. Watch Starsky and Hutch. Watch Gotham, man. Like, support them for that fun representation. Yeah. And just generally fight biphobia in your day-to-day life.
Yeah,
because if you can, it would be helpful. It seems to be the main driver of this issue in our society. All right. Well, I do now, before we leave this episode, want to give people a glimpse into what our special extra project that I teased earlier was.
Yeah. So once again, we've had a ton of fun doing this podcast. We've learned a lot, as you just heard. We will be back at some point. We will return in season 2 of Let the Boys Kiss with a whole new crop of stuff and checking back in with some of our old stuff. And if we get any more suggestions, we'll look at that as well. But part of the reason we're taking a break is because we have had this other idea percolating for a little while. As I said at the top, I need structure to accomplish things. And one of the things I have long wanted to accomplish is watching more important films. So I pitched this idea to Maddie. She accepted it, which I thank you. Where we are going to be launching our next podcast. I think when we release this, it'll be in 2 weeks. So it'll be sort of on the same schedule as this podcast coming out, just in a different feed, called The Oscars Got It Wrong.
Hell yeah. If anybody is a movie fan / Oscars watcher, you are familiar with this idea. How often are you watching the Academy Awards and they're making all of their decisions and you're just thinking like,
Green Book?
What? What idiots made all of these decisions? This doesn't make any sense. How could this be the best picture? How could they not have nominated so-and-so for such and such? So we just want to dive into this. And the way that we're going to do it is by taking all of the best picture nominees from any given year in a randomly selected order and watching all of the best picture nominees, deciding if we agree with what won, deciding if we agree with what was nominated, and coming to a conclusion about whether or not the Oscars got it wrong.
Yes. So we hope you'll come over with us on that journey if you enjoy us prattling on about things, and maybe also
we have so much more prattling to do.
Film as we do. But yeah, I'm excited for that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And by the end of it, we will watch like 540 movies. And
it is a huge like undertaking.
I'll never be yelled at again by somebody about movies I haven't seen.
That's
probably
not
still
true.
will be.
Movie nerds will yell at you for any reason.
The movies that didn't get nominated for Oscars that are still like important comedies that I haven't seen that were
sure, or even important dramas that just didn't get nominated. But we will dive into that as we go. So please join us on that journey. We hope to bring you all along. But again, we will return. We'll be back with Let the Boys Kiss because we couldn't say no to Let the Boys Kiss. We love this podcast.
Yes.
And we will be continuing it once we have enough ideas for a season 2. So again, send them our way. And if you want to send them our way, you can do so at ltbkpod@gmail.com or find us on Twitter and Tumblr at ltbkpod. I normally would say tell a friend to listen and new episodes come out every 2 weeks, but not anymore.
Well, you can still tell a friend to listen to the back catalog at their leisure. Yes. And new episodes of our new pod will come out every 2 weeks.
Exactly. Every other Friday at 6 o'clock Eastern. But we'll be, I think, posting a little teaser for that in this feed, so you guys should get it and get a sense of what that's going to be like. And join us on that journey that's going to be like 5 years long or however long it'll take us to do 93 years of Academy Awards.
We should say that it's not necessarily our plan to do that whole podcast and then come back to Let the Boys Kiss. We'll probably end up taking a break in that podcast and coming back. So it won't be a 5-year plus break.
No, don't worry about that. We will be back before 5 years from now.
Yes.
But I hope that you like it. I hope you've liked this. I know I've liked this. It's been a wonderful journey. Yeah. And it's been a blast. So join us over on The Oscars Got It Wrong. Listen to the back catalog of Let the Boys Kiss to tide you over. And we'll catch you over there. Thanks.